Federation probably needs to be fixed, right? That's the reality.
Federation needs to be renewed.
Yeah. Federation does need to be renewed. I mean, that's a given.
But the fate of sitting members depends on electors in the cities and those who come many miles and by varied forms of transport to vote in outlying booths in country towns. Still, in New South Wales, they can quench their thirst as hotels are open for the first time on election day.
So thanks for joining the podcast, George.
Thanks, Dave.
Very interesting times. You've just announced you are leaving the LNP fold, not just leaving Parliament, but actually had it with the party and throwing in with One Nation. Congratulations on the move.
Well, thanks, mate. I guess that, I don't do it to berate my side, and I don't ever want to get into the sort of petty politics part of it. But the fact is that what I saw over the last 2 years from my former side, the Liberal Nationals, was not much resistance in the face of all of these restrictions for COVID. And what I thought my former side held dear, which were freedoms for the individual, just did not seem to be there. It was very much lacking. Action wasn't taken when it should have been taken to go out and quash vaccine mandates, to quash restrictions. And it could have been taken, despite the fact that they say, it's all state governments. Yes, the sin was committed by the states, but the sin of omission was committed by the federal government that I used to be part of in not lifting a finger to stop it, and they could have. I pointed out various ways that it could have been stopped, but it never was. So
even some moral leadership, even just some rhetoric from the coalition, from the Prime Minister, would have been good to say, you know what, this is a state issue, but here's our take on it. As a party, we believe in minimal interference in people's lives. It's in our federal statement of beliefs that government should be small and not interfering. And it's up to Palaszczuk and McGowan and Andrews and the various other clowns running the circuses. But for our 2 cents, this is un-Australian. This is illiberal, and this isn't any good.
Some of that sort of stuff was said, but not much of it, not much. And so I think that, yes, it was very much lacking. I think that, again, I'm not going to go and throw brickbats at my former side too much, apart from the ones that I threw when I was in the tent. I don't think enough was done on that issue, and it could have been done. More leadership was needed. Unpicking of the anti-freedom restrictive measures was needed. It just wasn't done. And, every time someone went to the microphone and actually said something about it, there were caveats. And I think this whole thing is based on fear. The whole pandemic was driven by fear, and fear is never, ever a good place to be in, particularly when you're making up public policy, because it's always going to be onerous, draconian and restrictive, and all the measures were. But the fear from the federal government was fear of the media, fear of what voters who are cowering perhaps under their doonas might think of placing freedom above some false sense of security. And I think that's a great shame, because what was needed was principle-based politics, not fear-based politics, but we didn't see too much principle-based politics.
Well, you've certainly exemplified in your career 4 terms.
4 terms in the federal parliament, yes.
You've been principle-based. I think one of the things that first put you on my radar was when you quit your position as whip of the National Party, because you wanted to speak up about principles and not be subject to the higher standard of discipline that position demands on you. And in putting principles first, you took a hit to your pay packet, which I found impressive in the contrast that there is. But the purpose of this podcast is to reflect and have an honest look in the mirror of the right wing. And no, the purpose isn't brickbats, but the purpose is to be honest about the pros and cons of the various parties that right of centre voters have to consider in the coming election. Strategies aside, whether who and how you think Australia should be governed, what are the actual pros and cons? And so it's really important that we be honest about the party that you've been in and now are in, as well as the other parties, and not to play nice or to be gentlemanly, but to actually just do the mum who's sitting at a kitchen table thinking about all of these freedom parties and major parties that are now asking for her right of centre vote, and give her the facts about what the mainstream media isn't saying, and even what they're not saying. Everybody's getting the chance to talk about themselves and others, and so we want to essentially hear, what do you think are the policy strengths? And we'll go through the parties one by one, but what are the policy strengths and weaknesses of, we'll start with the Liberal Party. We'll go from biggest to smallest.
Yeah, right. Well, I've got to clarify before going into that, the Liberal Party or the Liberal National Party as it is in Queensland?
We'll talk federally.
Yeah.
Because basically the federal
Yep.
candidates and members, as you know, do sit in different party rooms once they get there to Canberra. So let's talk about the Liberal Party, then we'll talk about the National Party.
It can be obviously very confusing to Queensland voters in particular, where there's the LNP or Liberal National Party, but yes, down in Canberra.
And so you sat in the National Party room for your career?
I was a member of the Liberal National Party, but I sat in the Nationals Party room in Canberra, and that we hive off into the two different factions, if you like, within the coalition. And the Liberal Party, ostensibly, I mean, they are supposed to believe in freedom, in free markets, in this is the basis of them where they were formed. Robert Menzies obviously formed it as a pro-freedom party, and this is why I guess that I'm so aggrieved about what wasn't done, and in fact what, say, in New South Wales was done at a state level by that party. But look, the benefit, you could say, of the Liberal Party, and I'm just being honest here, the benefit of the Liberal Party is they are the major conservative / right, centre-right / classical liberal / libertarian government, or party rather, that will form government. I mean, I can't say the same of any other political party. It's just how it is, sadly, in Australia, until there's a change to the two-party system that we've got, or the two-party sort of dynamism that we've got in Australia.
Is it a two-party system, or is it a two-party result?
It's a two-party result, but the system is there as well. The results perpetuate the system. While voters in the main are voting either Labor or Liberal, that's where the discussions happen. That's the construct, that's the narrative that's put around the political contest. And also, you've got to think about funding and the mechanics of elections. The public funding that does follow political parties ends up going to those major two parties. The private funding of political parties ends up going to those major two parties as well. They're ingrained within the political system. They have a structure set up. They have boots on the ground in terms of members. They have a list of donors that they can rely on. So the fact that there is a two-party result perpetuates a two-party system that perpetuates a two-party result, and on it goes. So to get out of that paradigm is going to be very difficult for this country. Yeah,
and I guess the contradiction to the assertion it's a two-party system is that it would only take a significant number of people voting for any of the micro or minor parties, and there would be a different party in government, and one or more of the majors would be irrelevant. They would be minored.
And there's been that shift in other countries that have Westminster style of parliaments, such as, for instance, Canada, where the main Conservative Party quite a number of years ago was completely and utterly booted out, and then some, and like a phoenix rising from the ashes, new parties come about. So it could happen, but put it this way, it's going to take, I think in this country, it's going to take one of the parties getting such an absolute shellacking at the ballot box that they pretty much disintegrate because
it would have to be federally.
Members.
It would have to be federally.
It would have to be federally
because the shellacking they got in Western Australia hasn't made them skip a beat.
For the two major parties, Labor and Liberal, they both are federal outfits. They have state branches.
Yep.
But the branches aren't in control. The federal executives are in control. So you're right. It would have to take a wipeout at a federal level for, I think, for us to, for this country to get out of the two-party paradigm that we're in.
Do you think this is the year?
No, I actually don't. I think that, quite honestly, the Morrison government is going to get a shellacking. The Liberal National Party won't be in government. I fear, though, and I don't wish for it. Please don't think that I wish for it. I fear that we're going to have an Albanese Labor government. It will probably be a majority government in the House. Heaven forbid, but I do fear that that's going to be the outcome. And where the saviours are going to be are in the Senate. We're going to have
the checks and balances we wish we had.
Indeed, we're going to have a very strong crossbench. That's why I'm backing One Nation. That's why I'm backing Pauline Hanson, because she is one of those very strong crossbenchers who's been pretty much consistent about her views, and it's consistent with my beliefs as well, what she's out there saying and doing.
Yep.
So, that is going to be very important, but equally as important is ensuring that the coalition, who will also be in the Senate, are pulled towards the right again and see the error of their ways over the last goodness knows how long since Malcolm Turnbull was elected. Actually, they've drifted.
I think if any party can drag the Liberal Party back to the right, it is One Nation.
Yeah,
they are to the Liberal Party what the Greens are to the Labor Party.
It's like that. Yeah.
And there's lots of possible candidates to do that, but I think One Nation's got the runs on the board and the members in Parliament to actually do that. Now, you're running in Queensland at the number 3 position on the Senate ballot. Is that winnable?
Well, look, if I win it, the whole political landscape has changed, and I'll definitely want to be part of that new political landscape.
Makes sense.
It basically would mean that half the Queensland population voted for One Nation if I was to get in.
This might be the year.
It's a very optimistic call, and look, I'm not expecting to be a senator after the election, but I am expecting that Pauline Hanson will be a senator, and I'm even hoping she might be able to bring a mate down there, and she's got a number 2 who's probably someone that's not really would be considered the One Nation type, but he's a good bloke.
Not the One Nation caricature.
No,
type.
Exactly.
It's only a caricature.
Not the One Nation stereotype or caricature. This guy has been, Raj has been extremely important in the mining industry in Australia, being one of the people that spearheaded the opening of the Galilee Basin and new Carmichael mine there that I visited only about a month ago or more, and he'll bring a lot to the One Nation team, so it's good to see Raj there in the number 2 spot.
On the Liberal Party, perhaps it's about as hard to miss as shooting at the broadside of a barn, but negative points. Why would you want to advise to somebody who's considering putting the Liberal Party at number 1 on their lower house or upper house ballot?
I would just say think on what has not been delivered that you wanted to see delivered over the last 5 years or more. Think about the things that have been done that you wish hadn't have been done over the last 5 years or more. And I think as Conservatives, we can all think of a particular thing that hasn't been done we wanted done, or that got done that we didn't want done. And the question
is... List a couple for us.
Well, reform to the ABC. Where the hell has that been? Instead, we've given them billions more to spend attacking traditional Australia and traditional Australians. That's a pretty big one. I mean, religious discrimination, I hate the term, it should be religious liberty,
Right.
but it was left to so late in the piece, and then we had, this cabal of so-called moderate liberals that are basically just Greens and liberal clothing that turned up and scuttled that legislation.
Would you like to see those moderate Liberals ejected from Parliament and finding a new career?
I think that they're destroying the coalition. They're destroying centre-right politics, and that's why I couldn't have a bar of it anymore. I mean, the danger that there is now for the Liberal Party is switching from being a party that's traditionally been described and considered as conservative to one that's progressive, and therefore it's a pale imitation of Labor, and our choice as voters, this is the danger, will be voting for a socialist Labor Party or a less socialist Liberal Party. And I don't want to live in a country where they're the two choices you have.
Right.
That's not what the Liberal Party was set up for. It was set up to be a conservative, classical Liberal Party. Libertarianism was one of its key drivers, but that's not what I see from the Liberal Party today.
There are some great candidates, great defenders of freedom in the National Party. Contrast Liberal and National.
Yeah.
Strengths and weaknesses. Where is Nationals better than the Liberal Party, and where are their weaknesses?
So, and look, again, my former home, and I'm not going to bag people as much as what some might want me to do now. Barnaby Joyce is a great man as far as I'm concerned. People like Matt Canavan, great men, Lou O'Brien.
Agreed.
And these people, Keith Pitt, could go on and on and on and talk about half that party room, which
People who
has
deserve a vote and
solid values, and they're common sense conservatives, and that's what I think that people who traditionally vote for the Liberal and National Party, that's what they want to see, common sense conservatives, people who are principled, pragmatic when it needs to be, but not just going to give up because they might get a negative headline or because the ABC might say something nasty about them. Unfortunately, that's what we've become, beholden to this sort of the chattering class, the Canberra bubble. But to get back to the Nats, I mean, I think it's because the Nationals come from the country, ostensibly where common sense conservatism abounds. That's why this sort of mindset is there in that room. I got to say though that just like the Libs have had some Liberal moderates, unfortunately there's some national moderates that are in there now. I mean, the New South Wales National Party at state level, look at them. I mean, they pushed for abortion. I mean, you may as well vote for the Greens than to vote for the New South Wales Nationals. And so these people have infiltrated the party. They haven't looked at the objectives of the party, which actually says that the National Party, its objective is to be a conservative force in Australian politics.
Brilliant.
Not libertarian, not classical liberal, conservative force in Australian politics. In fact, its first objective is for a nation founded on Christian ideals, a society founded on Christian ideals. So that's what the National Party should be for. But there's people in there, I'm not going to name names, there's people in there, in that party room, they know who they are, and probably the voters know who they are too, who very well could be at home sitting in the moderate Liberal Party wing, right? The only thing is they can put on some RMs, they can put on a Dryzabone, and they can put on a Kubra. But in reality, you take all that off, they may as well be sitting in the moderate wing of the Liberal Party.
Yep. Well, let's talk about your new party, One Nation. I want to start with your criticisms. What are the areas for improvement, let's put it that mildly, that you think voters should be aware of, and try to be honest here with me,
Yeah, look,
when people are thinking about voting for the One Nation candidates?
Yeah. You're putting me in an invidious position where I'm going to have to find something to... I'll get a phone call. No, look,
Pauline's
criticism...
Pauline's going to correct the record when she gets to sit in the chair, so don't worry about that.
So a criticism might be, it's one that's thrown at minor parties all the time, you're never going to form government. It's easy to say all these things, easy to criticise, because you're never going to have your hands on the levers of power. True, that's probably true in the current two-party paradigm. Apart from the fact there will be some instances where the party does have its hands on the balance of power, in the Senate in particular, perhaps even sometimes in the House of Representatives, and therefore will be able to sway government one way or another. But I mean, the policies that are put forward by One Nation are really principles, and it's saying to the public that if you elect us, this is the kind of thing that we stand for and that we'll push for in Parliament, and we will try and drag whoever's in the government over to this through, horse trading on stuff that the party doesn't care about and the voters don't care about, for stuff that they do care about. I think that is where One Nation's coming from. So the criticism, which may seem like a bit of a cop-out, we're not going to win government, but you can say that for just about every minor party.
Now, just to be clear, Pauline is coming in to speak for the One Nation, so you're here as a commentator, not as a politician, so to speak. One Nation, what are the policies that you think make them the best right-of-centre option? What are the policies that they bring to the table, which they've got right that the other freedom parties haven't got quite as right or wrong?
Oh, look, I think they've got a fairly common sense position when it comes to all of these restrictions, the COVID restrictions, the whole pandemic approach. Pauline and Malcolm Roberts have
Are they distinguishable from the other minor parties' positions in any way?
In some way, maybe yes, but I mean, look, all of the, whether it's UAP or Lib Dems or One
This
Nation,
is what I'm trying to do
they've
here.
all been...
They're all peas in a pod
Yeah.
when it comes to freedom. What are the things that separate them and pull them apart?
Well, I don't know if it's a bit like Clive. He says freedom a lot on his posters, but that doesn't mean that he's got more freedom views than One Nation. Look, I'm not sure that you can pick a lot of these parties apart when it comes to the pro-freedom stance. I mean, One Nation is completely opposed to workplace vaccine mandates, whether they be publicly imposed by state governments, chief health officers, or whether they be privately imposed. I mean, that's the same view that UAP has, and it may not be the same view that Liberal Democrats have. I'm not sure what they think about private companies imposing it. Maybe they agree with that because of the libertarian streak. I'd need to ask Campbell Newman what they think on that particular topic. I'm not sure.
Campbell will be on in this. We'll ask him.
We think that whether it's government or a private corporation going to a person and saying your bodily autonomy is no longer your own, you have to have this substance injected into you even though it's provisionally approved, there's no long-term safety data, it could go on and on and on. We think that's wrong. And there are other minor parties that think the same thing. And so I don't know you're going to get too much of a difference on that.
So what about other
topic.
issues other than freedom? Where's there daylight between the parties?
So this is where I guess that you're going to start separating the minor parties. You look beyond this issue, but this issue is very important. I don't want to dial it down.
I actually want to talk about One Nation's policies because we will talk about the other parties.
And I will talk about it. But this issue is important.
Freedom.
I don't want to dial it down. Most people, not most people, but people are rightly concerned about these issues of freedom, what happened during the pandemic, and they're going to vote as such. So how do you differentiate? Well, on a lot of these parties, it's exactly the same. So it's then moving beyond that. What's your second order issue? What's your third order issue?
Right.
And so for One Nation, I mean, they're against the whole climate change agenda. The mantra that we again have to have stuff imposed upon us, have to have our freedoms curtailed, have to have our economy hurt, have to have workers sacked, to the climate gods. I mean, this is nonsense. So we're opposed to that as well, outright. And you can't say the same for both the mainstream parties, the big two.
Certainly not.
They've embraced it now. You probably can't say the same for some of the other minor parties because some of them just don't have a position on it. And that's the other thing. It is, look, Craig Kelly is a good friend of mine. He's a good bloke. I actually hope he gets elected to Parliament, actually, even though he's in a different party. But I just don't know, beyond the issue of being against all of these restrictions on us, what UAP stands for. I know what Pauline stands for. I know what One Nation stands for. They've got a long history. They've been a populist, pro-Australian party. Their name is one of the key mantras of the outfit. One Nation. We are one nation. Stop the division. Whether it's racial division.
Now it's in our anthem.
Yeah. Well, we're
meant to be one.
We're one and free because we couldn't be young anymore. But anyway,
look, I don't mind
I don't mind either. But
maybe the change
it's another
was a bad reason.
Woke sop. I mean, and I look. I was at an Australia Day event recently. Obviously, I was at other events, and the people up there are still singing "Young." Australian public haven't embraced the one yet, but anyway,
one of the 10 oldest constitutions in the world. But never mind.
So One Nation's got the history. It is conservative, but I would call it common sense conservative. We're not ideologues. We are practical. And we are populist, unashamedly populist. It's said today like it's a dirty word, but what's populist mean? In the interests of the people, for the people.
Driven by popularity.
Yeah, driven by popularity. But you can't say that about everything. I mean, it would be populist, right, to go and impose all of these...
I would say Scott Morrison is populist.
Yeah, well, populist to go and impose all of these lockdowns, but not principled. So populist and principled, not populist and sometimes principled. So if our principles are we support the rights of individuals, we support freedom, we support liberty, we're not going to embrace some populist ideal just because it's popular, that we should lock everyone down in their homes and force injections into them that are only provisionally approved and don't have long-term safety data. We're not going to do that.
Is there any unicorn in One Nation's policies? Something standalone, rare, that the other minor parties have neglected, forgotten, and it's just you only find it in One Nation?
Well, to sort of quote the castle, it's the vibe, because One Nation pitches itself as not just a common sense conservative party, but as a blue collar conservative party. I think that One Nation now is very much a workers' party. And what's happening is that disaffected Labor people are coming over to One Nation because they see elements of the old conservative Labor Party in One Nation. So if you ask me what's the unicorn, it's the vibe, and the vibe is a conservative workers' party, a blue-collar conservative party. I think there was an opportunity while I was in the former outfit, the Nationals, and when Tony Abbott was leader, for the coalition at that point to reinvent itself as a blue-collar conservative outfit. I think the opportunity came and went.
If they followed more of the Nationals' lead, they probably could.
Yeah. Well,
people like Matt Canavan are certainly forging
100%.
in that direction well.
He's definitely tried to lead the party and the government in that direction, quite successfully. If you have a look at the 2019 election results, where it was Matt Canavan that was spearheading the campaigns there for the government in, say, Capricornia and Dawson, alongside myself, where we got swings of, wild swings of, 12% in those seats. And that was basically on the back of this push to be there for the workers. And I think that it hasn't been embraced. Matt sadly went out of cabinet. He's
Or
now
better.
sort of.
I don't think senators should be in cabinet.
Yeah. Well, Matt was left cabinet.
He's doing a
pretty
much
much
better
was-
job for Queensland now.
And I believe he is too. However, it's also true to say that within that little room of the Nationals, he doesn't have too many friends with him on these issues. You know, there's always a fight in that room, and Matt's pretty close to Barnaby, so he has, you know, a voice in with Barnaby. But in terms of the majority of that room, I'm not so sure that they would want to see themselves as a
Good reason to
blue-collar
try and
Conservative party.
save him.
But that's the difference. The unicorn thing about One Nation, the only party in Australia right now that could say it's a blue-collar Conservative party. And that's why I'm part of it. That's
Okay.
my background, man.
Well, let's talk about Liberal Democrats now, the Liberal Democrat Party. They've got some great candidates around Australia. John Ruddock in New South Wales, Campbell Newman in Queensland.
Serious people, yeah.
Yeah, former Liberal Party stalwarts.
Yep.
What are the strengths and weaknesses of the Liberal Democrats for people who are considering where to place them on their own ballot preferences?
I think the Liberal Democrats are extremely principled. Their whole philosophy is libertarianism to the nth degree. I think they're trying to branch out and just not be complete and utter purists, but I think that there still is that element to the party. That's probably why, while I agree with the Liberal Democrats on their pro-freedom thrust that they had, particularly with the COVID pandemic restrictions, I probably can't come with them on everything. For instance, David Leyonhjelm, who I consider actually, he was a good mate in the Senate that I had there. David Leyonhjelm was completely pro-gay marriage. I mean, that issue's now been resolved, but he was pro-gay marriage and I wasn't. David Leyonhjelm also led a push against the sugarcane farmers when they were battling against monopoly millers, and I was firmly on the other side of the equation.
Seems like an illiberal position to take.
What they, I guess from the Liberal Democrat point of view, what they reckon they didn't want was government interference in the private sector like that. My point was there's a monopoly situation. You've got foreign-owned corporations that are in a monopoly position against small Australian farmers, basically offering take it or leave it contracts, and there needed to be a middleman there actually saying, no, you don't just ride roughshod over these people because you rule the roost. There's got to be some fair system in place. So that's, I think that
It's a
particular
difficult
element.
position for a libertarian.
Yeah. Look, it can be. For me, not so much, because as soon as you say the word monopoly or monopsony, all bets are off. It's not a free market. That's a market that's been bastardised, and probably most likely because of some government interference in the background.
I'm sometimes accused of being a libertarian, but I firstly a Christian, and God says that the reason government exists, and there is a reason, and that's it. It's to punish evildoers. And so as much as freedom is a godly value, people who are abusing, freedom has a purpose. It's not just an absolute right and a highest good. It actually has to serve greater goods. And when people are abusing freedom for selfish gains and purposes, at the very real and demonstrated abuse and oppression and human cost of other people, that's when government steps in to protect.
I agree with that. The reasons need to be genuine, though, for government to step in. And it needs to be real, not imaginary, because someone could say, oh, well, government should have stepped in when it came to COVID too. But we're talking about a virus with a 0.27% infection fatality rate. That's not a genuine reason for anyone to come in and step in. In the instance of the sugar milling situation, the fact that a foreign company was in there, basically the only one that these farmers could sell to, and saying to them, well, you're going to like it or lump it, I think that's reason enough for the government to come in and say, no, that's not how we play ball in Australia. Our business is fair dealing,
Yep.
You've got to have some negotiation. You can't just rape and pillage these people like this was, medieval serfdom.
Look, the
because
G.K.
you're in control
Chesterton,
like
I
that.
think, said, there is a thought which stops all thoughts, and that is the only thought which should be stopped. Meaning, freedom of speech is fantastic, but when your freedom of speech stops other people's freedom of speech, you're no longer pro-freedom of speech.
Yep.
So with the markets, as you clearly said, if market freedom goes to an extreme whereby it actually stops and harms the freedom of the market with predatory monopolistic behaviour, then that's something to consider government having a role in.
And so
carefully.
here's my criticism of the Liberal Democrats. I would think that Liberal Democrat philosophy would be hands off the economy. The problem with that, some of the biggest troublemakers in Australia today are massive corporations, mostly foreign owned or foreign controlled, who are so woke it's not funny. They are doing more damage to the fabric of this nation than probably governments ever could, and quite frankly, they do need to be pulled into line. Companies and corporations only exist by remit of government, right? In a natural economy, there's no such thing as a corporation. Corporations come about by corporations law. And yet, I guess that the philosophy that sits with the LDP is one of hands off, whereas I think that some of these people are too big, too ugly, and they need to be regulated and controlled so they don't screw over the average person. And we saw that with the banks. That's why I was so big on having a banking royal commission. I was one of the people that was instrumental in leading the government into having that royal commission, which did show a whole heap of problems with the banking sector. For anyone on the right side of politics to think that big corporations are our friend these days, they are not. I mean, look at Coca-Cola, for instance, wanting to tell people to not be too white. I mean, look at all the nonsense that we see from major corporations that are just happily marching down the left-wing route. I mean, really, we talk about the long march through the institutions that the left-wing has had. We just didn't realise that one of those institutions was going to be the corporate sector, and it is now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think you're right. There's a place for that kind of careful, minimal regulation. I'm definitely wanting it to be minimal.
Yeah, so do I. But can I give you another example? They're cancelling people now. I mean, is that right? And the issue of freedom of faith. We have someone who might make a statement in their private life. They might do something in their private life which is pro their faith, and for that they then get penalised by a corporation, because the corporation might sack them, saying that impacts on us. The corporation might
Israel
suspend the
Folau,
contract.
perfect example.
Exactly, Israel Folau was a perfect example. So, I think that the corporate sector step too far sometimes, and that's why I think that this criticism I have of the LDP.
Do you have any policies that you disagree with them on?
Apart from the fact that David Leyonhjelm was very much pro-gay marriage, and also the fact that David Leyonhjelm took that stance against sugarcane farmers, I probably couldn't name you another LDP policy that I was vehemently against.
Well, let's talk about, I guess, one of the common criticisms. I've got a lot of Christians in my audience. I'm a Christian, and I don't have this problem with them, but a lot of Christians have a problem with the Liberal Democrats, that they are not opposed to the liberalisation of abortion, euthanasia, illicit drugs, prostitution, and so on. How does a conservative or a Christian, I know my answer on that, but What's your thoughts on their policy positions on those
see,
social issues?
I haven't read too deep into the LDP's positioning and policies on,
Well, let me
on
explain
abortion
it for
and
you.
euthanasia. But if they are as you say they are, then there's a problem. Like I could not support
they're
a
definitely
party
as that.
that is pro-abortion. I could not support a party. But it's
Now,
interesting if they've taken that stance. But go
Just
on.
take a pause.
Yep.
I didn't say they were pro-abortion.
Yeah.
I said they are not opposed to the liberalisation of those laws. That doesn't mean they're in favour of abortion. What they're in favour of is government getting out of the discussion and conversation and ending the regulation.
Look, I think that it's the same thing. It's just it's exactly the same thing. They've just come up with a different equation to get the same answer. I mean, if you have no regulation around that, then basically you're for abortion. It's like what we should get away with the laws around murder. We don't want government interfering in what two people do when it comes to that issue. Well, that pretty much means that you are for allowing murder to happen and people to get off scot-free. Look, I just can't support that. And it's funny they take that stance because there's libertarians in the US who are very, very pro-life. And they resolve that seemingly disconnect between the two views by believing something that I actually said in my maiden speech when I was elected to Parliament, that I'm a conservative. I said I'm a conservative with a strong streak of libertarianism, and the most fundamental liberty of them all is the right to life. If you don't have the liberty of the right to life, you have no other liberties. And so libertarians could and should be in favour of life, so it's quite strange. I'm only finding that out now that the LDP actually have that view that abortion should be permissible, but I think that's sad, and that's why I couldn't vote for them.
Let's talk about the United Australia Party. Clive Palmer's baby, pet project, reigniting an old name, and Craig Kelly is the federal leader. Clive Palmer's the Senate candidate in Queensland on the number one position. What are their best policies? What are their worst policies?
Look, their best policies are all the policies that they and One Nation probably have in common around getting rid of these COVID restrictions. I've got to take my hat off to Craig Kelly. He has been a trooper on this from very, very early days. He was one of the prophets, I guess, that saw all of this madness coming and tried to warn about it, tried to stop it. If you ask me then what policies of the UAP is to criticise, well, I wouldn't be able to tell you, because beyond the policies against, the COVID-19 mania, I don't know what any of the other UAP policies are, and I don't think many other people would know either. That could be seen as a criticism, right? It's the most important issue to people who are going to vote UAP, probably. But I literally don't know of too many other policies, and it hasn't been espoused to me by either Craig or Clive Palmer as to what other policies of the UAP are. So the only other thing I'd say about the UAP is I don't know, beyond this issue of being against COVID restrictions, what the guiding philosophy or objective of that party is. And actually, could I just say even one step further, I think it's a shame that we actually have the UAP, because I think that by and large, all of the things that it mainly stands for, One Nation was there before, and you could probably pick up Craig Kelly and put him in One Nation, and take off the yellow shirt and put on the orange one, and there wouldn't be any difference in what he's saying. I just don't know why there needs to be two separate parties, actually.
Why do you think it is that attracted Craig Kelly to Clive Palmer instead of Pauline Hanson?
No, I don't know the answer to that. You'd have to ask Craig. The only thing obviously UAP is very well resourced, and perhaps you would have to ask Craig, but perhaps that was going through his head for a fight as big as what he wanted to put up. He would need a well-resourced outfit to be able to put up that fight. I did see one going a while back. The UAP wanted to abolish state governments, and look, state governments have done a lot of damage to this country with border shutdowns, COVID restrictions, all the rest of it. But you really think that centralising all the power in Canberra is going to make the situation better? I don't want to centralise power. I want to give power back to the people. So I can tell you that the idea of getting rid of state governments and having centralised power, that's one thing that I'd very much be against, that the UAP seem to be in favour of. And I think that most Conservatives would probably be against that too. It's centralised power. That's what we've been fighting. Power in the hands of the too few. What we need is the devolution of power, less power for state governments, less power with federal governments. I want to see a system like this, where Canberra has a minimal amount of powers. The state government has maybe a little bit more power than the federal government. Not much. Then I want to see local governments with a fair bit of power in their local communities in terms of the issues they're involved in, roads, rates and rubbish. And then what I want to see is every individual Australian, families having power over themselves and their households, not someone else lording it above them. And I think that's the problem with wanting to drive the power upwards.
Yep. Yeah, throwing the baby out with the bathwater is a brain fart.
A lot of
states
people
have
sort of
been naughty, let's get rid
that.
of states. Well, it's like, my house smells, let's burn down the house. It's just silly.
Hey, federation probably needs to be fixed, right? That's the reality.
Federation needs to be renewed.
Yeah. Federation does need to be renewed. I mean, that's a given. And there needs to be a sensible conversation around it. But the idea of getting rid of states, it's one of those things that, it's very easy to say, very easy line to throw out, but then you got to consider you're going to have to have a referendum with the majority of people and a majority of states have got to agree. You really think you're going to get that? Like, it's not going to happen. I'm actually for more states, and that leads to the devolution of power. I'm for a state of North Queensland. If there's another part of the country, Northern Territory, other parts of the country that want to become separate states.
What about New North Wales?
Yeah, New North Wales. Although we're going to have that one stage, the state of New England. And that was quashed through political skullduggery. But, there could be many other states in Australia. People think that's a crazy thing. Well, it's only crazy because you think it's crazy. It's not really crazy at all. How do you think that Queensland become a separate state? Because at some stage there, it was all New South Wales, and someone went, you know what? We're too far away from Sydney up here.
Yep.
We don't want to be part of them. We want to form our own colony. And so they split it off.
Yep.
So why can't that happen again?
Let's talk about the great Australian party led by Rod Cullerton.
In this whole fight, David, I know this is not the answer that you're going to like, but the enemy of my enemy has become my friend. And Rod...
Yeah, it's great philosophy.
I know. Rod is a good bloke.
Rod
is a good bloke.
No doubt.
Rod has
But you've
been
got a
trooper in the
painter
Parliament.
who's listening to this podcast right now, and he doesn't know Arthur from Martha
I know.
on the right-wing parties. They all look the same. They all sound the same. You can't give them all a number one.
Yep, I hear loud and clear. So I'm not going to knock them in terms of what they stand for, but I will just say with GAP, they don't have anyone in the Parliament that's with GAP. They've got a former senator who was there. I just think their chances are minimal, mate. Like, I really do. Why should people not vote for them? Because I think they're not going to get anyone elected. That's the honest truth of it. They are a minor party.
So
there wouldn't be too many people that have heard of Great Australian Party.
So, I mean, with the flow of preferences, you can put them anywhere, and
Yeah, of course you could. Of course you could. You need to read, again, I haven't read the Great Australian Party's policies, what they stand for and all the rest of it, simply because I don't think that they are going to make a big difference on the political landscape. Might be some good people in them, they might have the right views.
So let me ask you this.
Again, I wonder why they exist, why they don't all coalesce around one political party that does have some traction, and that is One Nation. But anyway,
Because Rod and Pauline had a falling out.
yeah, probably, and that's the great shame on the right side of politics. I mean, why do we have to get bogged down in personality clashes when we should be about principle? We should be about things that mean more than actually personalities. I tell you what, the ideal Senate would be one where there is a very full crossbench. There ain't too many, or there's no Greens on it, but the people that are there is, a heap of One Nation people, a heap of UAP people, a heap of Great Australian Party people, a heap of Liberal Democrats. Man, imagine that Parliament where we had that sort of that roadblock there to stupid ideas and stupid laws that might get thrown up by a socialist Labor government.
And here's why all of the technical changes that they might want to remedy won't change anything, is because we're not in the majority. Right-thinking people are not in the majority. Stupid people are in the majority, and they keep voting for the major parties. And until we change the majority, then the majority will take whatever system we fix and put us back exactly where we are today, because this is what we're meant to have when majority rules. When a stupid, immoral, craven majority rules, when they're driven by fear and greed, then we get the last 2 years of COVID rules where people want to be paid to stay home and they want to pray to government to keep them safe. No matter what the oath of office is, no matter who the head of state is, no matter the seal on the federal parliament, no matter the words in the Constitution, the same people are voting and they're going to vote for the same thing.
Yeah.
And the only way to stop that is with a strong, independent, conservative crossbench.
So, yeah, I don't want to slag off at the Australian populace, and I won't.
Suffice it to say, we're not politics, in the majority.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Politics is downstream of culture. And so, in order to change this sort of paradigm, the dualistic party paradigm, you need to change the culture, right? And change people's mindsets. Until then, this is the conclusion I've come to, which is why One Nation, right? Until then, our job is to be roadblocks to bad ideas.
Absolutely.
To stop the absolute insanity from taking place, and call out stupidity. The best government's a government that can't do anything almost.
I was going to say, if in the next 3 years 2 pieces of legislation are passed, that will be a fantastic parliament.
Yeah, well, it'd be fantastic if one of them was about religious liberty too, but I won't hold my breath because we couldn't even get it through.
I would rather they did
Liberal
nothing.
National government. But anyway, that is right what you've said.
Let's talk about Katter's Australian Party. Now, this isn't a nationwide party, it's North Queensland only.
Pretty much, yep.
Policy strengths, policy weaknesses.
And Bob asked me several times to come and join his party. He actually put a public appeal out. I love Bob to death. He's top bloke. The weakness is that it is just North Queensland, really. If you look at the centre of appeal for KAP, it's within the Kennedy electorate. All of the state seats that the Katter Australia Party has fall within the Kennedy electorate. You move out some to the seat of Herbert and the seat of Dawson and the seat of Leichhardt, which neighbour it. and the support for the Katter Australia Party dissipates, and it morphs very quickly into support for One Nation, which tells you something. Like, this is a party that's been built around an icon of North Queensland, that is Bob Katter. And so my greatest criticism is also what I consider the greatest strength of KAP, and that is, it is the party of Bob Katter. It has it in its name, Katter's Australia Party. Without Bob, I'm not sure that there is a party. Bob is an icon. You're never going to hear me say much bad about Bob at all. He is a true blue Australian. People criticise Bob, I criticise them. Bob's a mate, and hopefully will still be a mate, even though I didn't join his party, went with One Nation. But it is the criticism that it's the party of Bob, and that's what I say. He'll get a great deal of support in North Queensland.
Shooters, fishers, and farmers.
Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party, look, I don't know about them apart from they present a threat to New South Wales Nationals, and so they should. New South Wales Nationals have left the reservation. And so Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party are seen as an alternative to the New South Wales Nationals in rural areas throughout New South Wales.
A welcome alternative.
Probably a welcome alternative. The only thing that I'm not sure of is while they might be pro-shooting, pro-fishing, pro-farmers, which you want in regional Australia, I don't know what their guiding philosophy is. And I think there's a danger in that if you just want a party that's pro-bush, you could pretty well vote for a left-wing party that's pro-bush, right? So I need to understand more about the Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party beyond their support for regional Australia. I love regional Australia too. I'm sure the Labor Party would get up and say they love regional Australia, although their actions probably are against it. We need more than that. We need more than that from a party. So that's my criticism of the SFF.
IMOP, Informed Medical Options Party. Do you know much about them?
Yeah, look, the name says it all. I mean, they've been constantly against vaccination restrictions. Sorry, I'll say that again. So IMOP have been a piece of the political landscape that's been against any pressure to vaccinate. It is a party that's come into its own with what's happened recently, of course. Their single issue has become one of the biggest issues, but they are single issues still. So that's my criticism, is that while I probably agree with them now on their single issue, they are single issue.
I told you so.
Yeah. IMOP can say, I'm right.
The Jackie Lambie Network.
Well, this is a fan club, and I'm just don't have any politics to be part of a fan club. What's the Jackie Lambie Network stand for?
I'd be very interested if any of my listeners or viewers actually think Jackie Lambie's right of centre, a good person, pro-liberty.
Yeah,
I think that ship has sailed.
She's not. And this is the problem with Jackie, is that she started off, she was sort of conservative, and then she's gone all hell west and crooked.
Yep.
And the one thing that I will give it to her for is her stance on China. It's been unwavering, and I give it to her on that. I think she's okay. I like Jackie, but I don't like a lot of the things she stands for, and she's taken a view that's decidedly against freedom when it comes to the pandemic. Telling people that decided not
frothing
to get vaccinated.
at the mouth, rabid against freedom.
Yeah, indeed. So I don't think she's going to. She's not for freedom. She's not going to get much love from most Conservative voters, I think, and the Jackie Lambie network will basically be a network of one going into the future, as far as I'm aware. There'll be Jackie Lambie herself, and the rest of it's just a fan club. This would be my fantasy, is if you had the resources of UAP combined with the political appeal of One Nation, combined with the support from all the other groups, political appeal in North Queensland of the KAP, combined with all of these other groups, that they just come together and formed a force that that could perhaps make inroads and take on the majors. I'm not sure that I'm going to live to see it happen. There's also the flip side to that, and this was put to me by someone in One Nation. They said to me, you've got to remember that there are people who love Bob and would vote KAP but won't vote for One Nation because they don't like someone in One Nation or what One Nation said. There's people in One Nation, or people who will vote for One Nation, that won't necessarily vote for Bob. But there are people who will go out there and vote for them and follow their how to vote cards and preference all the minor parties. And so when it comes to the Senate, there probably is a benefit in having a heap of different parties out there that they can all leverage off. Now, this will only come to pass, that sort of strategy, if people preference. So here's my big call. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Here's my big call. Obviously, there's some people whose minds aren't going to be changed, but whether they're voting for One Nation, Katter, Gap, LDP, whoever it might be. But if your whole thing is about freedom, if your big issue going into the ballot box is about what happened over the past 2 years with COVID, make sure, both in the House of Reps and in the Senate, that you preference every pro-freedom party. Take them right down to the end. In fact, if you really want to, on the Senate ticket, number the people in the major parties. Well, there's only one side. It was the Liberals and or Nationals. People like Alex Antic, Matt Canavan, who actually stood up against mandates and that sort of thing. Gerard Rennick, but make sure you preference. That's going to be the key to victory, preferences.
Absolutely.
You can guess who he's voting for, but it's only one vote, the same as anyone else's. When counting starts, it's soon obvious that there's a big swing against the government. The people have voted in one of the closest elections in Australia's history.